This is a TalkStation original podcast.
We have to discuss the circumstances in Israel. What can you share with us there in the perspective of the UK? I can share with you how we're feeling and seeing here in the United States, but let me start with you.
Well, the UK and the rest of Europe, all the governments have come out solidly behind Israel and attacked Hamas for their terrorist action. However, having said that, there are a lot of demonstrations against Israel in support of Palestine. And here in the UK alone, the number of attacks on synagogues and Jewish areas has quadrupled since the Hamas attack on Israel. There is a sizable portion of the population which is not behind the government. And I think the governments are solidly behind Israel because the United States is solidly behind Israel, and they need America's nuclear umbrella.
You mentioned the relationship with the United States, the fact that the U.S. is supportive of Israel. I would contend that this is also an issue of, if you will, recognizing the value of Western culture and the influence that Israel has had on our countries, since we are, and I'm going to use the term, Judeo-Christian based communities. I think that Israel has a strong relationship with us in regards to not only its religion, its culture.
I think it has a stronger relationship with the United States than it does with Europe.
Really?
Let me just give you another example of some divisions which are being created here. And that is that as soon as the attack happened, the EU Commissioner for Palestinian Affairs, who's responsible for aid to Palestine, who is Hungarian, announced that they were cutting off all aid. EU was cutting off all aid to the Gaza Strip. Now, the EU now is the biggest supplier of aid to the Gaza Strip, humanitarian aid. Immediately, the different governments said, no, you can't do that. And he had to retract the statement. So the EU aid is still going ahead. So there's not the sort of unanimity within Europe, and certainly not between a lot of people in the public and the governments, that there is in the United States.
Why do you think that is the case, Tom? I hear in the States, there's not all of that much of a consent. There is a general consensus, but we're seeing situations that are, quite frankly, were shocking to me. Major educational institutions, I'll use it as an example, Tufts University, Harvard, other institutions, UVA, as I recall, where we have students that have actually praised Hamas and the efforts on the invasion of Israel and the death of innocents as well as military personnel. So there is this friction, if you will. So why is it, though, that Europe is not as, shall we say, homogenized on this topic of support for Israel?
Well, they feel that Netanyahu's pushed the Palestinians into the situation where they have no option but to respond. I mean, Gaza has been referred to as the world's largest open prison. It's been blockaded for 16 years. The unemployment, I tried to find out what the employment figure is. I think it's like 40% unemployment. You know, one of the lowest standards of living in the world, one of the most densely populated areas. They basically, a young Palestinian has no hope if they're living in Gaza. And if you have no hope, then you are pushed into extreme conditions, extreme reactions. And this is what a lot of people say. Certainly, and this is important, the Saudi statement on the Gaza war has said exactly that. Basically, what do you expect if you treat people like dirt? I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Right. I understand.
But the other diplomatic language.
But the other side of that equation, Tom, Israel has always felt threatened because of the efforts that, quite frankly, to remove the Israeli state, which, by the way, I have to say, came about as a result of an agreement. It started in World War I and concluded in World War II. But there's a a feeling among the Israelis, at least that's how we perceive this here in the States, that this is a country that's, well, the future is annihilation because of the neighbors.
It's very difficult to see a way forward, because from the point of view of the Palestinians, it's their annihilation that they say they've suffered. And so they want back the land that was taken from them. It's a very difficult way to see it forward. The Palestinians, I think, from their point of view, they have felt they are very angry about the Abraham Accords. They are very angry about the possibility of a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, because they feel those Abraham Accords and that rapprochement are going over their heads. They're not taking them into account. They're dismissing them and pushing them under the carpet. And they refuse to be pushed under the carpet. They say, you have to deal with us. And if you don't, this is what's going to happen. The Saudis have said nothing officially about it, but they have issued a statement saying that if you treat the Palestinians like dirt, this is what will happen.
The concern, in addition to the Gaza Strip, is the West Bank and what is happening there. That's another enclave, if you will, of Palestinians, hard by Jordan. What is the concern? Where are we learning?
They've had a little bit of violence, not much yet. They've had demonstrations by West Bank Palestinians in support of Palestinians on the Gaza Strip, but no violence as such. Now, I was reading an assessment. They've called up all the reservists in Israel, and the total military, once everyone's called up, and it'll take about a week for everyone to get in place, is 500,000. And they're saying that between 100 and 150,000 will be used in some sort of operation in Gaza. Another 100,000 or 200,000 will be used to protect the borders with Lebanon because of the fear of an attack from Hezbollah, and the border with Syria. And finally, the balance will be distributed on the West Bank around Israel as an internal security measure. So they are concerned about the Palestinians on the West Bank revolting, if you like.
Palestine, the Palestinians have been divided, politically speaking, and the leadership in the West Bank does not agree with that of Hamas. And as a matter of fact, I think it's the Palestinian Liberation Front, the PLF, has had conflicts with Hamas.
And Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the PLO on the West Bank, has said that he supports the Palestinians in Gaza. So there's nothing like a war to unite people, just as there's been a lot of division in the past few months in Israel, and they have all united in a government of unity, a national unity government, and reservists who were threatening to go on strike have said, no way are we going on strike now.
I mentioned earlier that it's not necessarily 100% unanimous approval of support of Israel. However, the U.S. has definitely decided it will defend Israel to the extent, as you know, the Navy has sent a fleet into the Mediterranean to be close to the conflict in case Israel needs aid. And of course, there's concern about other countries coming to the aid of Hamas. Egypt, possibly Libya, Syria, Iran, of course, is rattling its sabers, as interestingly enough is Iraq. Here in the States, we think there's a potential for greater conflict, expanded conflict. Is that the same thought there in Europe and particularly in London?
Absolutely. They're terrified of it. I think the first thing they're going to look at is exactly what Israel's reaction is going to be vis-a-vis Gaza. That there are probably people in the Israeli cabinet who would simply level it. And what we'd be talking about would be ethnic cleansing, genocide, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What then do you think would be the reaction of the United States to that sort of action?
I think
if Israel overreacts, overreact is not the right word.
But I understand in a heavy-handed fashion. I will tell you, yes. I think the U.S. would defend Israel. The reason is we here in the United States see Israel as ostensibly our only friend in the Middle East. Now, that unfortunately diminishes, I think, this relationship we have with Jordan, which, by the way, is not getting a lot of discussion. Also with Saudi Arabia, and we've strengthened our relationship with Egypt over the past decades. So there's obviously an awareness of our geopolitical relationship, but at the same time, Israel is our largest beneficiary of our military largesse. Our largest foreign aid representation goes to Israel's defense. So I can tell you right offhand that we have a very close relationship with Israel, and it's strengthening even as this war is underway. And a perfect example of that is one of the aircraft that we are committed to in our military arsenal is the F-35. Israel played a key role in the development of that airplane and in the manufacturing of certain parts for that airplane as we speak. So there's a close reliance and appreciation for Israel here in the United States. The other,
go ahead. Can I just paraphrase?
Yeah.
Whatever Israel does, you will support it.
I think that is the case. Yes, I really do.
Okay. Well, then I think that means that there really is a potential for this to spread enormously.
No question.
And America's interest in the wider Middle East would be seriously, I was going to say damaged, affected at least.
I can't say that it's any better now. Anyhow, in spite of our efforts to give $6 billion back to Iran, and by the way, that is very contentious as well. The initiation of this attack in the midst of the Ukraine war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I'm wondering if there's not, if you will, an effort to sort of misdirect our attention.
Yeah, there have been suggestions that the Russian hand is in there somewhere. They have close relations with Iran, and they have close relations with Syria.
But also they have close relations with Israel.
Yeah, they have they have very good relations with Israel. And they have ever since 1992, 1991 sort of thing.
So I find this, but I'm enough of a conspiratorialist to say I think Russia had a hand in this in an effort to misdirect it.
It's possible. It hasn't been proven. The issue has been raised and talked about as a possibility. I mean, if we want to talk about Iran, I think Iran definitely had a role. However, one person who I spoke to said, yes, Iran supplied the weapons. Yes, Iran trained the Hamas fighters. Yes, they provided financial aid. No, they did not fire the gun that started it.
No, and
that was a Hamas decision.
Right. There's no question there. I don't believe that they fired the gun, but it just shows the disruption in the Middle East. And I'm going to say to you, this goes back to the efforts on form of nation building that we attempted to do as a result of World War I and then culminated in World War II. We're seeing the creation of these nations, and it's an old theory, be careful what you wish for, you may get it. And we've got it now. And this, to your point, I think could expand beyond the borders of just Israel. I hope it does not. Ukraine, what's the future there? And will Europe continue to support Ukraine amidst all of this conflict there in the Middle East?
This is very interesting. Well, first of all, obviously, if another war starts out as it has, which requires American and European assistance, then that puts pressure on the assistance that they can provide and curbs on the assistance they can provide to Ukraine,
right,
which is, in Putin's favor. So that's point number one. There are also some very interesting, very recent developments in Europe. For instance, in Slovakia, a man called Robert Fico has just been elected prime minister. And he has said uncategorically that they will no longer send weapons to Ukraine. They will no longer send any aid to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They will not support EU sanctions. They love Russia. And he's formed the coalition government. Now, one member of the coalition government, there are two members of the coalition government. There's one that's called the Slovak National Party, and they support Russia. And there's another centrist party which says we don't want to do anything which would damage our relations with the EU and NATO. So it's not a foregone conclusion that they're going to cut off aid, but it's certainly what the prime minister wants to do. Now, at the same time, there are elections in Poland this week on the 15th of October. And it's really close between the populist PSI party, a centrist party led by the former president of the European Commission, a chap called Donald Tusk. And the PSI party is going for a third term. And they have recently announced that they don't want to send any more weapons to Ukraine. And so you are getting the start of a split. I think that in Poland, that once the elections are over, it will change. That they will renew their relations with Ukraine because they really are worried about Russia.
Right. That's the thing that really surprises me. We recognize that the imperialistic efforts on the part of Vladimir Putin will not stop with Ukraine, and in many regards, and it's been said by a Ukrainian that I was speaking to. I talked to folks here in the States who recently sought refuge here in the country from Ukraine, and I am involved in a effort here locally to provide assistance to the non-combatants in Ukraine as well. But in talking to a Ukrainian refugee, they described themselves as the shield of Europe. And I said, quite frankly, they're the shield of Western culture because they are withstanding effort on the part of Vladimir Putin to reconstruct and expand what was the Soviet Union. I think to a large degree, Poland and Slovakia, as well as other countries, Hungary, there in Eastern Europe, should be concerned. And I think all of Europe should be concerned.
I think, when you said recreate the Soviet Union, I'd go back further and say recreate the Russian Empire.
That would be, I use the empirical term,
yes. The Soviet Union,
yeah.
Stalin wanted to recreate the Russian Empire.
Right.
And that's what he did. If freedom and democracy are the issues, and we use Israel and Ukraine as two staunch bastions of freedom and democracy, why is the right wing of the Republican Party not supporting aid to Ukraine? But yet they support aid to Israel.
One, out of frustration with the counteroffensive, if you will, and the fact that there's also concerns that Ukraine is a center of major criminal activity. We've seen that in numerous occasions over the past 3 decades or so. And the Ukrainians, of course, have worked very hard to survive no matter what. And so there's a sense of cynicism, not skepticism, cynicism about how Ukraine is using all of this military aid and some concerns associated with that. Plus, there is frustration with the current administration over the inability to control the flow of illegal immigrants into the United States. There's an interesting story that appeared 3 weeks ago in Newsweek magazine in which it was noted that the CIA and the FBI have all acknowledged that there are Russian, Iranian, and Chinese operatives who have slipped across the border. There's grave concern here that the United States may be facing a similar situation to that of Israel when Hamas quietly established a series of operatives within the Israeli state. So there's a great deal of awareness, shall we say, not fear, but awareness here in the States, and a little frustration with Ukraine.
So the fear is these people are coming through Ukraine.
No, they're coming through the southern border, but there is fear that the money sent to Ukraine is not always going to its intended purposes, that it is being siphoned off, that it's, shall we say, a form of embezzlement. There's just because of the history of Ukraine. I will tell you that even within the conservative movement, within the Republican Party, there's not a lot of consensus on the thoughts of controlling or turning back some of the aid to Ukraine. There's awareness that Ukraine is very valuable to holding and stabilizing Eastern Europe. So I don't think that your description is overly accurate. There are some who...
I think people here may have made too much of the Freedom Caucus in particular, holding up the budget making much of the and claiming that and saying that one of the main reasons for holding up the budget was that they wanted to remove the aid for Ukraine.
Yeah, that I think that as much as anything was for, if you will, and the whole issue of the budget and the continuing resolution, political theater, as I described it, because it really is not going to change anything whatsoever. But I'll tell you, the situation in Israel, quite frankly, is going to raise awareness of the value of Ukraine because, as I said a few moments ago, I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist, and I think that others in this country are as well. Russia has a hand in what's going on in Israel. Russia is having a difficulty in Ukraine, and they need as much distraction as they possibly can get. Leadership in Europe, will they apply any pressure to the Middle Eastern community to restrain any support for Hamas? And of course, the other side.
Absolutely, they're going to be applying restraint all around. They're going to be applying restraint to Israel, not to basically indulge in genocide in Gaza, and they're going to be applying restraint to the Saudis and Jordanians not to react to whatever Israel does. And I note just one last thing, that Biden has issued a statement saying we support Israel.
Right. Yes, he has.
Qualified it and said that as long as they abide by the rules of war.
Right.
And those rules of war do not include a blockade which cuts off the civilian population from water, electricity, and food.
The problem you have is, and this is always the case, the collateral damage of your attacks. And this, we've seen this in war every time. But the real difficulty is identifying who the combatants are. And I will say to you that there is a recognition that Hamas sees every Palestinian as a member of their armed forces, as does Israel see every member of its population as a member.
I can see that. I mean, I covered Northern Ireland.
Right.
And, you have 12-year-old boys throwing stones.
Yes.
They're 12-year-old boys. That's what 12-year-old boys do.
I know.
Should you shoot them? Are they Hamas or not?
No. Listen. This is one of the challenges of warfare, and that's the unfortunate aspect of it. And we're seeing this in the Ukraine right now. And by the way, just make note of this. There was a children's hospital in Israel that was targeted by Hamas. So it's an issue of who applies the rules, who follows the rules, and we acknowledge the fact that this war will not necessarily bring an issue of peace. The real problem, we both acknowledge, is how do you establish that process for finding a sustainable peace? Because what we have right now and what's led to this moment is not sustainable.
Hi, I'm JJ Smith.
And I'm Zach Nally.
And we're Carteret County News-Times reporters and host of the new podcast, Paperboys.
Join us each week as we bring you exclusives with coaches and athletes, tournament organizers, and newsmakers in the world of sports.
We'll cover high school football, basketball, and so much more, as well as catch up with former star athletes from our county and beyond.
Listen every week to the Paperboys podcast, streaming now on Spotify, YouTube, and at CarolinaCoastOnline.com. New episodes every Friday.